Storyhinge, Episode 63, Nicole Stewart, Oral Fixation Show.
I think a lot of what I desired from acting, which was maybe ultimately to be able to accept myself, has come to fruition through working with other people and sharing their stories and seeing them shine and seeing them really grow.
Welcome to Storyhinge, where we unfold more meaning and value in everyone's personal story. At Storyhinge, we explore foundational ideas and beliefs through diverse personal stories in order to discover more meaningful paths, greater happiness, and accelerated growth in one's life. We believe everyone has a beautiful story to grow. Now here's your host, Jason Vidari.
Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us here on Storyhinge. Today we are joined by Nicole Stewart. Nicole Stewart is a sixth-generation Dallasite who has lived in Chicago, the Bay Area, London, New York, and Los Angeles. She's an accomplished actress, teacher, and director of theater. After graduating from Northwestern University in the theater department, Nicole went on to act professionally in New York and Los Angeles. Her writing has appeared in the Huffington Post, Upworthy, Modern Loss, and D Magazine. She spoke about the power of sharing your story at TEDx SMU and TEDx Kids. Nicole aims to continue her work by modernizing the ancient art of storytelling through the show, Oral Fixation Show. Nicole is celebrating 5 years of marriage to her husband and Oral Fixation co-producer, Anton Schlesinger. And with all that, Nicole, welcome to Storyhinge.
Thank you.
And I'm so excited to talk to you. You're another person involved in storytelling and also a neighbor just up the street from us here in Houston, being in Dallas, and that's exciting to have a neighbor in the work. So I guess typically here in Storyhinge, we like to go back in the past a bit, hear a little bit about your story and, some of those pivotal things that led up to where you're at and the work you're doing today. So my understanding is you didn't start off in storytelling. That wasn't the first idea. So why don't we hear a little bit about that?
Yeah, I had a really big idea coming out of the gate. I was ready to hit Hollywood hard as an actress. And I fell in love with characters and playing characters and getting to understand new perspectives and points of view through acting and through plays, primarily through the theater. So I pursued that from age 16 to 26, essentially, professionally in New York and Los Angeles primarily, but I studied at Northwestern University in Chicago, and I went abroad to London and studied with the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and I spent summers doing Shakespeare in the Redwood Forest out in Northern California. So I really let my desire for being inside of a character determine my life's choices for a decade or so. And it was a wild ride.
Yeah, well, let me hear about that. What was the fascination with character and getting inside a character? What's that like? Because, I come from an engineering background, not quite the acting background. So I'm very curious to hear what's that like.
Well, I don't know if you read, but I'm an obsessive reader.
Uh-huh.
I love fiction. I think I'm just curious about other people's experiences and why they do what they do. And I think, it's ultimately a selfish reason because I want to try to understand myself better and understand why I do and the things that I do, and maybe even attempt to change the ways that I think and I feel sometimes, because I'm a big feeler, things on a grand scale. And so acting was definitely an outlet for me to channel those feelings that was wide open. I grew up in Dallas, which is very put together. Appearances are really important. And I wanted to be perfect, and having feelings outside of a certain range just wasn't part of that picture, but acting provided that for me. I just love, I had parents that were married and I was the oldest of 4 kids. I wanted to know what it was like to be a cowboy, What is it like to be someone whose parents are divorced? What would my life be like if that happened? So a lot of it's living in imagination, but with the intention of understanding my immediate moment more intimately.
Yeah, no, that really resonates. One of the things I've said, I think several times on the podcast, is I've always been fascinated with what it would feel like to be someone else. It's kind of a weird feeling I have. That's like I've only lived my whole life from this one body, from this one perspective, and that seems really weird to me. That even saying that sounds weird, but it's weird to me that I don't know what it's like to be someone else, and maybe that's part of hearing stories is gives you a taste of that.
I think a great story is like you experiencing that thing for yourself. That's certainly what I attempt in my writing and in the work that I encourage, is that the person reading or listening to the story or watching the story experiences what you experienced as you're reading it.
Okay. So you're out, following that dream, that passion, I guess, if you will, in acting. And how did that go out? How did that turn out? Let's hear a little bit more of that story.
Well, it was really exciting. It was a total reality check. I had been really doing well in environments that were merit-based, because I was a good hard worker and applied myself. And that didn't seem to tip the scale in New York City. It was just really difficult to get into the right rooms, and I felt shut out at a time when I thought my time was limited. Here I am, 22 years old, and thinking I have got to get work and I've got to get seen and make a name for myself right now, because right now the hot thing is being in your early 20s.
That'd be challenging.
I happen to look a lot younger than I am, so that was to my advantage. But when reality TV's programming started to really come out, like right around the turn of the century, I was trying to break in LA into sitcoms, which reality TV took that airtime. So, you know what, Jason, I can blame it on 25 different things, but it just wasn't the lifestyle that ultimately was going to be fulfilling for me, because the thing about reading a book is you can pick it up anywhere and you can dive into that story and be there. You could turn on a podcast and experience the thing immediately, or you could watch a film. But if you're the artist creating that work, you have to have a lot of different elements coming together. You have to get the job. The lights have to be right. The shot has to be right. Some of my most frustrating work on camera was that I would give my best take and it wasn't usable for a technical reason. So that ultimately grated at me and it discouraged me and I got frustrated. And it wasn't until I picked up writing about my life that I started to feel connected again. And that ultimately led me down the path of producing and directing, which is so much more fulfilling for me now, to be able to share my passion and my love of story with other people and then hold their hands as they go through a transformation.
That's cool. Do you have a specific story that kind of illustrates maybe what that was like, or when you started realizing that there needs to be a shift?
I was broken up with in a most brutal way by my agent. Having a talent agent's sort of everything, because they're the person that opens the door for you and gets you inside the rooms. And I happened to have one who I found out later was a cokehead, bipolar character, but he did know a lot of people. And he called me at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday, which I knew was not a good sign, and said that the agency had met and that they had voted and I hadn't gotten enough votes, and that they were really sorry that they couldn't help me further, and that I would be receiving my headshots via FedEx. And thank you and good luck.
That was it, huh? That's just...
It was just like landing on your ass hard. It hurt so badly. And winning that agent had been sort of a coup as well. Like I had initially gone into his office to his commercial department, but they thought I was adorable and they asked me if I had anything ready for comedy, and I did. And it just was one of those things where everything went my way that day, and they were like, "You're fantastic. You should have your own TV show," and they signed me right up.
Hmm.
So it wasn't. It was very intimidating to me to think about trying to create a miracle again. So I just said, you know what? Let me just put the brakes on for the first time in my life since I've been a cognizant human being. Let me not make a decision based on acting. Let's just see what happens if I don't try to get an agent right away. And I ended up meeting a woman named Karen Gutman, who was also a Northwestern graduate. And she invited me to Spark, which was a storytelling show that she was a producer on in Santa Monica. And I was like, a storytelling show? What is that? And it was incredible. There were probably 75, 100 people there at this little black box theater. And people were some of them were actors that I recognized, but they were on stage being themselves. And afterward, they hung out and they had cookies and peanut butter sandwiches, and people talked to each other like in a grounded way. And I had never experienced something like that in LA. It was remarkable, and I wanted to be a part of it. And so I submitted a story and was accepted, and then you could only do it every 6 months. And so during the 6 months in between, I started taking memoir writing classes and doing other storytelling shows in LA, and I found that my work was provocative and interesting to people. I started to make peace with the fact that acting was never going to be give as much as I was going to give to it. And I wanted something that I could find joy and fulfillment in on a daily basis, and that I could feel connected, that I could feel plugged in. And so through a series of events, I ended up moving back to Dallas and looking around Dallas, and there was nothing going on in storytelling. And I come from entrepreneurs, and I had run a business teaching Pilates for a number of years. And I thought, you know what? Let me just try to do my own storytelling show. And now that was, I guess, 8 years ago.
Wow. It's fascinating, the kind of some of the phenomenon around story, and especially the live storytelling that seems to be going on in these past 10 years or so. And it's, on one hand, I think it's kind of funny. And my brother and I have this conversation sometimes, that sitting around telling stories to each other, that is an old thing we've done as humans way back before history, sitting around telling stories. And yet now we'll go and pay for that so that we can do that again. And I just find it funny. And, we hear this word story a lot. And I want to ask you, when I say, what is a story? What does that mean to you?
Well, it definitely means a character, somebody that you can relate to. So, a protagonist, male or female protagonist, who is in a situation and is going to get themselves out of it somehow or another. That's pretty much a story to me. Okay.
And, as you're transitioning from, acting to the storytelling, I guess I think that's an important story for people to hear, because sometimes we hear that, or maybe we often hear that, hey, just pursue your dream, keep going at it, you'll get there. But sometimes that dream needs to shift. So you hit that somewhat already, but what are your feelings as you started making that change? Was that hard to let go? Did you feel some of that failure, or did you naturally see, hey, this is a natural progression, and as I'm moving on to something bigger and better for myself?
Oh, I appreciate the question. I absolutely felt the failure of not getting to play great roles. It was acute pain, and more painful than almost anything else I've been through. Because I felt like something that I had been given, which is this talent to dive into other people's bodies and bring them to life through my own. I was mourning the loss of that, of the opportunity to utilize that talent, or that's what I thought at the time. But you know what? I am on stage regularly now through oral fixation. I have had more articles written about me in oral fixation than ever I did as an actor. So many of the aspects of success that I associated with acting, I'm getting to experience now. It's just in a different way. I have the opportunity to do photo shoots and be in, magazines sometimes, and fun stuff like that. I think that stuff is fun. Some people probably wouldn't, but.
So why don't you bring us up to speed on what oral fixation is and how that started, and a little bit of the history and where it's at right now.
So Oral Fixation is a live storytelling show for adults. I like to say it's rated R, featuring regular folks, local folks reading aloud their true personal stories on a certain theme, which is always an idiom in the English language in the case of oral fixation. So right now I'm working on a show called Stick Together, and I have everything from stories about marriage and siblings to overcoming a cleft lip and cleft palate to having a husband stitch gone awry and basically having to have a surgery to increase her vaginal opening. So oral fixation is an exploration of life. It's a close-up magnifying glass into thoughts and feelings behind a particular moment or series of moments in someone's life. And I'm fascinated with transformation when people change, and I really want to understand what goes into decision making. So there's a lot of thoughts and feelings shared in oral fixation stories. Because of my theatrical background, it's very much a theatrical experience when you come to oral fixation. We started off in a 99-seat black box theater, and now we are in the 750-seat city-owned Moody Performance Hall in the downtown Dallas Arts District.
Okay.
So we have a fantastic world-class facility. We do a video package where we interview all the storytellers, and we put that up on stage before they come out and they tell their stories. There's music that's playing that each storyteller gets to choose their entry music that kind of sets the tone and gets them jazzed up for their story. And then we have a reception after the show where the storytellers and the audience can talk, which is definitely harkens back to my Spark experience eating peanut butter sandwiches. It's a little bit more glamorous, but the feeling is the same, which is bringing together the community.
Okay. And how has that changed? Because I believe you're in season 6 now. And is that changed over time, or has that essentially the same format?
I think, it's evolved, certainly. We didn't have the videos for the first couple of years, but the nuts and bolts are the same, Jason, month to month.
It has, I guess, I told you before we started talking, I've listened to all your podcasts, which has a fair amount of some of these live storytelling, and I've really been fascinated by them, and really thought that these are highly valuable, and a lot more people need to hear these through a podcast, and we'll talk about that later. But what is it that is personally for you to go through one of these performances and that night? And can you, I guess, basically, I'm asking, take us take us to one of those nights and hearing these stories and what that feels like.
Absolutely. Imagine a dark theater and a comfortable seat, and the lights come up on me, a little redhead. And I usually wear a fancy dress. I'm very lucky. My mother-in-law sells haute couture, so I get to wear beautiful clothing. And so I stand up there in a fancy dress and I talk about the show and how oral fixation came to be and what the theme means and what it means to me. And then I'll introduce this video, and you'll see one by one the storytellers talking about why they're doing the show and why they submitted their story and what they want the audience to know about them that maybe, isn't in their story. And then music fills the room, and the first storyteller takes a stage and the spotlight comes up on them, and they're standing and they've got their pages and there's a music stand in front of them, and they read their stories and they take you down memory lane. You can't believe it. It's like truth can be really stranger than fiction. Maybe something is just hysterical, or it could be revelatory. We are always pushing the envelope as far as what we talk about, from abortion to sexual abuse to addiction. But I always make sure that every evening has levity and brightness as well, so that we see all the shades of gray. And there's applause at the end of every story. And there's a real sense of glory, I think, during the curtain call when the storytellers come out. And for example, Gretchen Carlson, who was the leader of this Me Too movement, she was the instigator of really everything. She was the first woman to come out and sue a CEO for sexual harassment. And she and I did a show together earlier this year, and she talks about her sexual harassment experience and jump off a cliff. And when she came out to bow, we had a picture of her as Miss America, which was part of her story. So you kind of get to see, or we had one of the women from Jump Off a Cliff. Her story was about skydiving. So we put a picture of her up in the air above her when she bowed. So you get this sort of coming together full circle feeling. And I try to make myself really available to the audience too. I mean, we usually probably have about 300 people or so, but it's important to me that people feel like they can talk to me and connect, because the show would not exist without the audience, and the show would not exist without people willing to share their stories. And you never know from the outside who has a great story.
That's interesting. And what is the selection, or like the refining process that these storytellers go through? Because it's not just, they don't just show up and talk. There's a lot of planning and work behind that, I believe.
There certainly is. And that's why I think we have been successful, because it's not an open mic night. I solicit stories on a certain theme. And for example, this last show, we received 29 stories for 7 spots. So my co-producer and I read all of the stories and talk about them. And then we look at them as a puzzle, and we try to figure out how we can put together an evening that's going to make people at the end of the night feel exhilarated and fantastic, and closer to each other, like maybe even more hopeful. So I'm looking for insights. I'm looking for emotional maturity. Certainly I'm looking for the ability to put words down on paper, but some people may not have written anything since high school or college, and that is fine. Some people may be scared of public speaking. That is fine. Those are 2 things that I'm very comfortable helping people through. But if anyone is defensive in their story, or they're finger pointing at someone else, those are usually red flags. Like this is not really a piece that's ready to go on stage. Being able to talk about yourself, objectively requires emotional health. And I think I've gotten pretty good at figuring out who's in a place where they can do it successfully.
That's good. You remind me of some of my other guests. We've talked about that because as I've explored story and listened to some of my guests talk about their story, a big thing that's come up is our own personal story and how that intersects with all the other stories in our lives. And one of those things that has similar to what you're saying is that some stories of yourself aren't ready to share yet. You're not mature enough. You haven't worked through those things enough to share them. So I can appreciate that. As you've heard all these different stories, are there any ones that stick out in your mind that really were impactful to you?
Absolutely. Arguably my favorite story ever was early on. The theme was one night stand. And I had put it out there that someone could write about a nightstand. And someone picked up on it, the brilliant Hillary Link. And she had, when she was 6, been given this piece of antique furniture, this antique nightstand. And she didn't care about it a whit. But it stuck with her. It stuck by her side up until she was in her 40s. She goes through and she tells her life story next to this nightstand, and the nightstand plays a role in it. And she happened to have a most fascinating life. She had cancer several times when she was a teenager. She had her leg amputated. She was then an addict. Later, she was stalked and raped in her home, and the alarm company called the phone that was sitting on that nightstand, and the assailant said, to tell them that everything was fine. It was just a brilliant way of sharing what was quite a heavy, intense life. It was just a gift, truly. So I think my husband, Anton, and I, who are co-produce the show, we really love it when people take the themes literally. Because most of all, when we use an idiom, if you're saying a one-night stand, you're talking about sex, But sometimes it's fun to put it on its head and see what comes out.
That's cool. And I believe I heard that one. I believe that one's on your podcast, is it not?
Yes.
Yeah, that was very good. What do you think it is about? Because every time I hear one of these deep stories, even these personal stories, and especially some of the difficult ones in that background, I'm always just amazed by it. Yet there's a lot of reluctance often for us to share those. What do you think that is that makes it hard to share some of these personal stories where we really reveal some of ourselves?
I don't know about you, but the first time that I told anyone my deepest, darkest secret, they laughed. And I was like, no, this is the worst thing I've ever done. And they're still laughing. I think that we feel shame about our vulnerabilities. And I don't think that person who laughed at my deep, dark secret actually did me a disservice. I think that they were letting me know that it wasn't really as bad as I thought it was, which was actually great feedback for me to get. So it certainly was worthwhile for me to to get that feedback of, hey, you might think you're the devil, but that's not the worst thing I've ever heard. But I think, for me, for example, I decided to model the behavior of really going there and sharing your personal story when my first pregnancy took a sharp turn. And I had set as the theme for the beginning of season 3, Bun in the Oven. And I was going to be 8 months pregnant. And I thought, okay, I'm going to tell a story in that show about my pregnancy. Well, at 5 months pregnant, my husband and I learned that our baby was really, really sick and not healthy. And we ended up terminating the pregnancy. And I decided to still tell that story, which was alarming to my parents. They were very concerned about protecting me from judgment or criticism. And I was afraid of that. I mean, talking about abortion in North Texas is not.
Yeah, that's not our not our thing here.
Is not a thing. You know? But I knew that if I was in so much pain at the loss of that child and the loss of the potential of that child, that I could have been consumed by it if I hadn't have spoken out. Because what ended up happening, even though I was afraid, was that I ended up attracting in many dozens of people who now fill my life, who have had similar experiences, who reached out to me in a number of ways, after hearing my story. So, and let me know that they appreciated me pushing past the shame and the humiliation and the feelings of failure, and having the courage to say, this didn't go the way that I wanted it to, but I think it's important that you guys know about it.
On the other side, has anybody actually attacked you on that from sharing that story? Have you felt any of the negative sides of that you may have feared at the beginning?
No.
Isn't that amazing?
It's unbelievable. If anything, it's the complete opposite. I went to an all-girls private school, and we had an event a couple years ago. It was the 100th anniversary of the school, and I went to the party just like anybody else would, and it was almost like I was a celebrity. Like, girls were coming up to me, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and it was just overwhelming. It was like no one had ever spoken out. So I think that, I realized after that a lot about my own privilege as a white woman in being safe in that situation, because I think if I had different color skin, it might have been received differently. And that's hard, but all I can do is just acknowledge that because I have the ability to do it, that I'm going to.
Yeah. No, that's powerful. I think there's a lot of subjects out there like that we need to share more stories about. I've had some of my guests on the podcast share about, trying to commit suicide, some mental health issues. And it's so amazing to me that I look at them, I say that you're so strong to be able to stand up and share that. And I've never felt any bit of, criticism or looking down upon them in any way, shape, or form. It's like, wow, that's amazing. I just think there's so much value in sharing more of those difficult stories. As you've been involved in this, I think we're hearing a little bit of it, but what has it done for you personally to be involved in hearing all these stories and sharing some of your own story?
I think a lot of what I desired from acting, which was maybe ultimately to be able to accept myself, has come to fruition through working with other people, and sharing their stories and seeing them shine and seeing them really grow. Yeah.
No, that's good. So what does the future look like for oral fixation, for your work? What's the plan here?
Well, I want more people to be exposed to what we're doing. We have an incredible archive of hundreds of stories on our YouTube channel that I would love for more people to see. And so we've been strategizing what we can do, and we came up with, I think, a pretty good idea. We are going to start live streaming our shows.
Oh, cool.
So starting on Valentine's Day, you will be able to, from the comfort of your own home, experience oral fixation from anywhere in the world. And we did it as a test with our last show. We didn't even really tell anyone until it was actually happening. And I've heard from lots of people that they watched it and they had a great time. So I'm very curious to see how that might help us grow. Also, I am going to be heading down to your neck of the woods this spring to produce a couple of shows at the Match Theater in downtown Houston called Out From Under the Rug, True Life Tales of Abortion. And it's continuing a series that I've done in Dallas and Austin, Montreal, and this March there's going to be a show done in Bogota, Colombia. And we have season 7 completely planned all the way through 2019. So sooner than later, I'm going to get all of the dates and themes up on the website so that people can submit even far out in advance, share their stories with us, because I think it's so heartwarming. Like this last time when we had 29 stories, I just thought all those people wrote something that they wouldn't have written otherwise than oral fixation. And that's so exciting and gratifying to me, because the thing about writing is that this is something that you have forever. You can hold it in your hands. It's a gift that you can give anyone. And so I truly do think that when people go through the experience, and certainly I feel this about the stories that I have done in oral fixation, but that story exists as a piece of art forever.
Maybe I'll ask you this, because you've talked about writing, both writing and also live storytelling. Can you compare and contrast those activities? And because I've had both on the podcast, both writers, people talking about writing your own story and the power of that. And upcoming here, I'm gonna have a lot more live storytellers coming on. So, what's your thoughts on those two forms?
I like to marry the two. I think that it's really essential, especially for non-professionals, non-professional writers or performers, to have a script and to stick to it. Primarily for the producer of the event, i.e. me, who wants to have quality control over what's going on stage. So I think that the writing process is key, but it goes beyond that. There's something that I learned about from Karin, my mentor in LA, who talked to me about creating a healing narrative. And what that is a story that can be read and experienced by anyone, and as if they were really there. And to be able to do that and write that about yourself, you have to achieve a level of emotional distance and processing that is almost always cathartic. I think writing is absolutely essential. For me, the reading part is just as exciting, because it's the boldness of it. It's the bravery of, not only can you read my words, but you can hear my voice. You can see my face. And you can hear my heart. Yeah,
that's good. So if people want to hear more about this and hear more about oral fixation, where can they connect with you?
Oralfixationshow.com is our website. Our Facebook is facebook.com/Oral Fixation Show. YouTube.com/Oral Fixation Show. We are Oral Fixation Show on Instagram. We are at Orally Fixated on Twitter. It's important to put the word show in there, Jason, for reasons you might imagine.
Yeah, okay, I got that.
If you're searching for oral fixation, something else might come up.
And we'll make sure we have all those links on the website and on the podcast itself. So we'll make sure for the audience out there, if you want to link into that, we'll have those. This has been a great ride here with you, Nicole. And as we're rounding up, I guess I just want to give you an opportunity to share anything else that we might have missed. Maybe some value with an audience out there, maybe thinking about storytelling, maybe wanting to get more involved with it. And what would you say to that person?
Be bold. Carpe diem. My favorite story of all time was written by my friend Hillary Link, who is not alive anymore. So now's the time. If you feel that the iron is getting hot, strike. Just sit down and write and just vomit it down onto the page. Do not stop and try to make it better. Just put it out there. And that doesn't mean you have to share it with anyone yet, but just get it down onto the page and then read it out loud and see how it resonates with you. Does it ring true? How can you really pull forward the truthiest, juiciest parts of your story and celebrate your life?
That's beautiful. Well, Nicole, I thank you for taking time to be with us here on Storyhinge, and we'll be supporting and following your work.
Thank you so much, Jason.
All right, a big thank you for all of you joining us today. Thank you again, Nicole, for spending time with us here on Storyhinge. For those of you that want to connect with Nicole and learn more about her work, you can find her at oralfixationshow.com. And those links will be in the podcast notes and then on the website as always. And just a few thoughts before we part today is that, I love to see other people involved in storytelling work and story work. And it was a real treat for me to talk to someone, I consider kind of a neighbor up in Dallas, involved in this work as well. Again, to emphasize, in my mind, the power of our personal story and of writing out that story and of reading it or telling it. It's really just a reminder to me to keep working on my own story and to encourage all of you to do that as well, to write out those parts of your story, to share them if you can, but at least start to do something and be bold about it. Go and take those chances. And I was also touched by her story about, real shift in her career, where she was set on being an actress and making that dream happen. But as life often does, it shifts things on us. And that doesn't mean the end of it. That means maybe we just meant to take another path. And oftentimes, and I've found with talking to other people, is that in that shift, we actually find more meaning and more happiness potentially. And often, retrospectively, when people look back at that path they've taken, they see the dots connect, and it makes more sense that why they had to take that extra that shift that they didn't want to take initially. And that's real encouragement for those of us out there that are struggling with something or feel like we're on a path that we didn't expect. I think that's enough for this week. You guys have a great week out there. Be sure to share the podcast, subscribe, share it with others. It continues to extend its reach, and I thank you for that. Until next week, have a good one.
Thank you for sharing with us at Storyhinge. We hope this time together has added more goodness to your journey. Until next time, onward and upward, and may your own story continue to grow more beautiful.